So I really love to be on the program committee of PasswordsCon. And this one from Jeremy Brown, your password should be shorter. When I received that and I just saw the title, I was like, oh, dude, like this is gonna be hell on earth. Because we've had talks before discussing password strength and password length. And it usually ends up with a lot of discussions after the talk. So this was a given to me. I had to say yes to this one. And Jeremy, here we go. Take it away.
Thank you. All right. Let's see. Check. You can all hear me. You can all hear me from here, right? Iffy in the back. Okay. You know what? How about now? Can you hear me in the back? All right, that's good. So, after that introduction, I'm Jeremy, and I just want to thank you for coming to my talk. Welcome. I know it's the last one before lunch, but I'm going to try and get through this quickly to get us all out of here. So, as I said, I'm Jeremy, and if you're listening to me right now, your passwords probably should be shorter. Now, I want to begin my talk with a vignette. If you don't know who Drake is, he's an entertainer. He makes music, and some of his music has titles like 9 a.m. in Dallas or 6 p.m. in New York. So it's 9:30 p.m. in Las Vegas. You're at Hacker Summer Camp, probably 2 watered-down drinks in at some random vendor party, and you're just walking around casually eavesdropping on conversations. You have currently focused your attention on 2 InfoSec bros who originally started a conversation based off comparing password managers, but have since pivoted to comparing the passwords within them. Now, the first one says, oh yeah, man, like it's tough to be secure sometimes, like having to do 20 character passwords on my phone where I have to hit the special button twice to like open the curly brace or an angle bracket just sucks so hard. Now, the other tech bro, not to be outdone, says something like, oh, yeah, sure, I know exactly what that's like, but, all my passwords are 40 characters long. Now, the first tech bro, feeling a little bit defensive, counters with something like, well, yeah, but all my really secure accounts have 64 character passwords. And the second bro, again, to one-up him, says something like, oh, well, I use 100 character passwords for the accounts I just can't lose. Now, if you've been to Hacker Summer Camp more than once, you've probably heard a conversation like this. If you've been more than twice, you've probably been on one side of a conversation like this. And, I'm not here to judge you. I'm just here to inform you. And the first thing I'd like to inform you about is that password truncation is a thing. Now, thankfully, in the year of our Forsaken God, 2022, pretty much everybody understands that we don't store passwords today. We store password hashes, most likely using bcrypt, which is based off the Blowfish encryption algorithm. And this in and of itself is not a problem. Blowfish is a very strong encryption algorithm, and to the best of my knowledge, there have been no major breaks against it. But it does have one important limitation that I think many people overlook, which is that if you were to read the original Blowfish documentation from the 90s, you would see that the Blowfish key scheduler only uses the first 72 bytes of user-provided input before truncating. And notice I said 72 bytes there, not 72 characters. Now, back in the mid-90s when Blowfish was created, this would be a distinction without a difference. The only encoding anyone really cared about at the time was ASCII, and that was strictly 8-bit characters. But nowadays, we have this character encoding called UTF-8. And UTF-8 supports these characters called emoji. And in case you don't know, emoji can take up to 4 bytes to display one. So if you wanted to get particularly frisky and make your password all emoji, you could only use up to 18 of them before bcrypt would begin to truncate your password. Now, you might say, well, sure, the cool kids hashing algorithm that all of the startups use might suck at storing passwords, but I'm sure bigger companies have put in the time and effort to store passwords correctly. Yeah, I don't know why you would think that, but just in case you forgot that Microsoft used to chop passwords up into 2 7-character hashes to make cracking them easier, until 2017 at the earliest, business Microsoft accounts such as Office 365 only allowed you to use a maximum of 16 characters. Now, I don't know if that was a soft truncation where it would just drop all the characters after, or if it was a hard truncation where it would say you can only use 16 characters. But if Microsoft was getting it wrong in 2017, I doubt Oracle or IBM are getting it right today. So, since most practical security talks are usually improved by defining a user model, I've tried to create one for this talk. So, our user is your typical InfoSec bro. Actually, scratch that. They're an InfoSec enthusiast. And as an InfoSec enthusiast, they have a slightly outsized sense of self and perhaps are a bit more paranoid than generally warranted. So naturally, they assume nation-state adversaries are against them, and thusly, they need strong passwords. Now, this user has not created a threat model or put any kind of thought into how much effort NSA would actually expend in cracking one of their passwords. But what they did do was turn up the generated password length in 1Password and go hit the bars. Now, if we were to ask our user how long they want their passwords to survive an attack from the NSA, they would say 4 years, but that's 4 years on average, so it needs to last a maximum of 8. Now, we are currently in the bad place, but for the purposes of this talk, I'd like to put us in the mildly worse place, where essentially everything is the same, except everybody stores their passwords in single round unsalted MD5 hashes. Yeah, it's just mildly worse. Now, I began researching this topic back in 2020, and at the time, the most powerful single hash cracking box I could find was the Terahash in Manus. However, also at the time, I couldn't find much in terms of Hashcat benchmarks. So I had to use the next best thing, which was an advertising tweet for a 45-box cluster of 44 Terahash in Manus and 1 Terahash Brutalis box, comprising a total of 448 RTX 2080 cards that could perform roughly 2 to the 45 MD5 hashes per second back in 2020 or so. Now, this was a $1 million cluster at the time, not including the cost of the energy to run all these boxes and cards or to cool them. But the future is now, and everything else is in the cloud, so why not put your hash cracking box there? And to that end, Amazon has introduced the EC2 P4D cluster, specifically here the P4D 24XL, which is essentially a supercomputer in the cloud. With 96 CPUs and over 1 terabyte of RAM, along with 8 NVIDIA A100 GPUs, this can perform roughly 2 to the 39 MD5 hashes per second. Now, all this power doesn't come cheap at a little under $33 an hour, but if you were to reserve one for 3 years, the per year cost falls to a little over $100,000 per year. On the screen, you can also see the P4DE 24XL, which has double the GPU memory and is a little more expensive at $130,000 a year if reserved for 3 years. But at the time of my research, I couldn't find any Hashcat benchmarks on the P4DE, so this talk will focus primarily on the P4D. Now, at this point, we should probably begin asking ourselves, how much effort can we expect NSA to expend in cracking a password? Now, I think it makes sense to start by giving them a P4D cluster, but our user objects. Well, but Jeremy, NSA spends $100,000 a year on USB tchotchkes that we're all too scared to plug into our computers. They're not going to have just one P4D cluster. And you know what? Our user's right. NSA is a government agency, and the only thing the government agency loves more than filling out forms in triplicate is blowing their budget. So, since we're in the mildly worst place, let's give NSA 9,709 P4D clusters. Now, that's roughly $1 billion per year on AWS, and the total of 9,709 clusters is good for roughly 2 to the 53 MD5 hashes per second. But again, since we're in the mildly worst place, let's give NSA an additional fudge factor up to 2 to the 57 MD5 hashes per second, like just to make things a little harder for ourselves. So, to recap, we have an adversary that can brute force at 2 to the 57 hashes per second, and we have a user who says their passwords need to be able to last against such an attack for a maximum of 8 years. So, how many hashes could such a adversary perform in 8 years? Well, if we take out our trusty dusty calculators, we will see. I have to turn it to the side because we're doing advanced math here. That's 2 to the 85 hashes. So, therefore, any password our user needs to generate will need 85 bits of entropy to be secure against such an attacker. But how long does a password have to be in order to have 85 bits of entropy? Well, they can definitely be shorter if you allow keyboard specials, because they will bump up our per character entropy and thus let us hit our entropy targets more quickly. But I don't know about you, but every time I've had to put my TV, when I've had the bad idea to connect my TV to Wi-Fi, and I've had to put in special characters because my Wi-Fi network is 64 characters long, and it's got a $sign and a curly brace and a backtick and all that. I die inside. So let's not even consider those. And we'll stick to just uppercase English letters, lowercase English letters, and numbers. So how many characters would we need using just uppers, lowers, and numbers to meet our entropy goal? Well, if we pull out our calculator again, let's see. Just 15 characters. And I want to remind you, this hypothetical has favored NSA at basically every turn. We are storing all our passwords in pretty much the worst possible fashion today, short of plain text. We have rounded up NSA's compute power multiple times and given them a fudge factor on top. We are letting them spend $1 billion a year for 8 years to crack just one hash, and it still gets beaten by 15 alphanumeric characters. And I want to remind you, this assumes NSA knows your password topology a priori, so they only try 15 character alphanumeric passwords. If they start with shorter passwords, or they start with passwords that contain special characters, they'll waste even more time and not get anywhere close to finding the real password. Now, at this point, our user has another objection. Well, but that fails to meet my arbitrary security goals against my adversary, whose ability isn't based in reality. And I mean, that may be true, but I want to assure you that all is not lost. First off, any adversary, if we were to leave the mildly worse place and return back to the bad place, any mildly competent organization today isn't storing passwords in unsalted single round MD5 hashes. They will be using bcrypt, scrypt, pbkdf2, or if they're particularly fancy, Argon 2. And let me tell you, nobody is getting close to 2 to the 57 Argon 2 hashes per second today. Secondly, if account access is what's important and not just finding the pre-image of a particular hash, using a U2F key would be superior to using a longer password along any metric anybody really cares about, and additionally provides a fringe benefit against phishing. Not that our user would think that's very useful to them, as they are so sophisticated they could never be phished. They're sort of like the InfoSec version of Drax over there. And lastly, if the account the password is attached to is related to a US service, or the data the password protects is on a server on US soil, well, then the NSA is just one rubber-stamped FISA warrant away from getting it anyway, kind of rendering all of this moot. However, our user comes up with one half-decent objection, which is that they have to use a computer that won't accept a password without special characters. And, you know, I understand that. Like, I too have had to work on systems whose admins haven't read a NIST guideline since 1996. But to that end, the solution is simple. You just generate a 15-character password anyway, choose your favorite special character, and then put it on the end. So the computer gets to check its box, but the actual strength of your password is based off the 15 characters that came before, and not the special. This additionally allows you to avoid the situation where you have to keep regenerating random passwords, because the random passwords you've been getting have special characters that the computer doesn't like. Now, at this point, our users still somewhat reluctant to accept the light of reason and math. So I'm going to break out the big guns and let them know that Hashcat developer, TerraHash founder, and DEF CON Password Village staffer Jeremy Gosney agrees with me. Now, you might say, well, sure, of course the founder of a password cracking company wants people to use shorter passwords. But, I mean, he's not wrong about the math. A 20-character password with keyboard specials has more entropy in it than the TLS key that will protect it in transit. So you could go from any longer password to 20 characters with no real loss in security. And if anybody could crack one of those, they could just break TLS. And at that point, we're all fucked, regardless of how long our passwords are. Now, I'm sure by this point, everyone is going to run to update your generated password settings, but let's not be so hasty. Now, this scenario has NSA spending $1 billion a year for almost a decade to crack a single hash. If we were to move back into a more realistic scenario where NSA only has 10 of these P4D clusters, spending $1 million a year on AWS for 2 to the 43 MD5 hashes per second, but we give them 20 years to crack a single hash, then you can still defeat them using only 13 characters. And again, I want to remind you, nobody's doing 2 to the 43 PBKDF2, bcrypt, scrypt, or Argon 2 hashes today. And by the time we can, it's highly likely that the service the password hash is connected to will have folded due to not being able to make money. So, in conclusion, no, you don't need to make your bank password 64 characters long with specials and emoji, even if you'll always use your password manager to enter it. Now, you might say, well, Jeremy, it's not hurting anyone if I keep doing this, right? And no, it isn't. But I have a feeling if you're at Hacker Summer Camp, you probably have opinions on security theater. And let me tell you, a password with more entropy than the TLS key protecting it is the height of security theater. So you can keep using 64-character passwords and like the password police aren't gonna come for you. But if you do, I don't wanna hear you talk any kind of shit about TSA anymore. And with that, I end my talk. I do tweets sometimes, If you wanted to read them, I don't know why, the QR code on the left links to my Twitter account. If you wanted to point someone to this talk, but you didn't want to have them listen to me ramble on for 20 minutes, the QR code on the right links to a blog post version of this talk. And with that, I think we can open it up for questions.
Well, you know, I don't even know where to start. If I should say I feel harassed or abused, or again, also the NSA. Like, dude, have you ever met the Hashcat team? I mean, like, those are the pros at cracking stuff, not the NSA. But questions, lots of them. Okay.
So the question was, what if my password is all A's? And like, if your password is all A's, I mean, you could have 128 A's and that'll still probably get cracked in like under 5 minutes. Like, I don't know if your password is longer but still very, well, put it this way, correct horse battery staple is like 40 characters, but that's not gonna last long.
There are other benefits to longer passwords, like 5-word diceware type phrases that make it easier not to crack or not crack a password, crack or defend a password, I guess, but to manage it in the context of humans that have to do something with it.
Oh, so, yes. So the point there was having longer passwords is fine if they are things like generated via diceware, because that uses human words and then humans can memorize those words. And that's true. I was focusing more on randomly generated passwords like the type you get from like 1Pass, LastPass, and those. I don't know if any of those do diceware style passwords. Oh, Bitwarden does. So you might want to, like, if I cared about human memorable passwords, then yes, this doesn't necessarily apply, but the way you generate entropy is different for diceware passwords versus the typical randomly generated passwords that this talk is about.
So I happen to be the person who wrote the diceware generator in one. Oh, sure. Yeah, so I'm the one who actually wrote the diceware generator in 1Password. So I can say we have it, and we've had it for quite some time. But closely to the point of your talk, and I'm fully agreeing with the last 2 minutes that I heard as I walked in late. When we set in 1Password the default length for generated gibberish passwords, we knew that 13, 14 characters would be enough. And we just said, look, we've got to make it more than 16 or people will think they're too weak.
Okay, so the point there was humans are dumb and we had to make them stronger than they needed to be so humans wouldn't freak out. And, you know, that's fair. I was focusing mostly on the actual entropy inside the password, but if you have to make your passwords longer so your CISO doesn't flip a brick, then I guess that's what you'll have to do. But hopefully your CISO, well, you can point your CISO to this talk and then they can see, oh, they don't have to be 16 characters. They can just be 15 characters with no specials, and that's more than enough.
Hi there. I was just wondering, in your opinion, what would be the best way to draw upstream service providers or supply chain partners to this talk? What's the best way to get non-technical people in tune with your recommendations here?
I think the best thing might be to I would need to write a white paper or something and then get a booth at RSA to give it to them, but I don't have that kind of money. So maybe you can, I made a blog on this. You can maybe point them to the blog and then have them read it, and then hopefully it'll get through to them.
So, there are dark patterns that we all experience day to day. What if a really long, annoying, complicated password is actually just a dark pattern to try to get my users to use my federated single sign-on thing? Because in incident response, a huge number of incidents that I experience are with people that are not using the single sign-on thing. Like, if we actually make it harder to do short passwords, maybe we can direct people towards the easier answer, which is have one password for everything and then single sign-on everywhere.
I think that goes back to a point I made earlier in the talk, which is that if you want, like, in that sort of situation where you really care about security, you'd probably be better off by giving everybody like a U2F dongle and then like require two-factor, so it doesn't really matter how long their passwords are, because like somebody won't be able to get to that like U2F token to get in. And you could possibly roll that into your single sign-on system or whatever. But I would probably say do that instead of make people use stupid long passwords.
Hi, great talk. Ira Victor, I live here in Nevada. I helped write the bill that made the Center for Internet Security Controls considered the standard for data security in Nevada. And it's now in 4 other states like that. I think an alternate to getting a table at stupid RSA would be to have the Center for Internet Security put this into their controls, and I'd be willing to do an introduction to those people there.
Like, yeah, if we could somehow get it into law that, yeah, you don't have to do ridiculous passwords like that, so people can point to that, that'd be great.
The item is that anybody can do whatever they want with their data, but with these laws in states, it gives a safe harbor from litigation when you follow a standard like the Center for Internet Security. So we don't need a law that says make your password short or long. We need to say, hey, you're not going to get sued if you follow a good standard. The good standard in many states is now Center for Internet Security. Then we put this as part of the consideration for what is a good standard for data security.
Like, yeah, that could work.
You talked about trying to protect something for 8 years or 20 years or something like that. It doesn't sound as though you were considering, I doubt that Amazon is going to be having exactly the same offerings in 8 years or 20 years. They're going to have much faster things by then. Did you consider what happens when you factor in a Moore's Law effect on the cracking?
To an end, yes. That's slightly, I deal with that slightly by giving NSA the fudge factor. But additionally, like the numbers I chose, like the numbers I targeted were so ridiculously overpowered that Moore's Law isn't gonna get us close to them anytime soon. Like I said, we're not doing like close to 2 to the 43 scrypt hashes anytime soon. The numbers I was talking about before were for just MD5 alone, and that is far and away the fastest algorithm to crack today. But like bcrypt and scrypt are like 3 to 5 orders of magnitude slower. Like, it's going to take a long time just for bcrypt to get to where MD5 is today. And even at that point, you're still safe by using just 15 characters.
Okay. Well, I'll give it one more question, last one.
Okay, so I got to say that it's a solid argument. You know, it's very entertaining. But the thing that I've learned in this business is that any recommendation you have, people will take it kind of to the extreme. You know, like we said, no, you know, passwords must expire, and then all of a sudden people are doing a 30-day expiration on passwords. So now we're saying passwords don't need to expire that quickly. Now people are saying they never should expire. and it should be include random characters, and then it got to where people needed 200 bits of entropy. So anyway, you say they should be longer, and then people are wanting 100 character passwords. Now you're saying shorter. You got to be careful with any kind of advice in this business, because people will take it to the extreme. And I just wanted to say that because I don't want to see the next recommendation being 8 character passwords. So.
Well, I guess if I'm making a recommendation, it's that all passwords should be 15 character alphanumerics. And I think even if so everybody started expiring passwords because NIST wrote it up sometime in the past that you have to do it. And then NIST, in 2003. And then NIST realized that was not useful and they got rid of it very recently. So I think people did it because NIST said that's what we should do. And if we could make NIST say, make all your passwords 15 character alphanumerics, then that's what they would do. And that would be more than enough for basically any situation today. So, I mean, we could try that, or, we can say NIST is a guideline and not a rule.
And I have to give people now the option of going for lunch as well. But at 2 o'clock in 1.5 hours, we actually have Jim Fenton speaking, and his name is on the NIST standard. So he's right over there. So I think you two need to talk. Have a great lunch, and I'll see you back at 2 o'clock.